Hello, everybody. Welcome to Preserving Your Past, Tips on Storing and Handling Family Collections. This is the second video in a storage and handling series we at the Newburyport Public Library Archival Center are doing for Preservation Week 2022, which is an annual preservation awareness program from the American Library Association. My name is Becky Geller, and I'm a librarian at Newburyport Public Library, and I work with both circulating and special collections. I've taken the preservation concepts used by the cultural heritage community and hopefully made them applicable to a home audience. My goal is to make preservation practical for everyone who has materials that they want to keep for future generations. In this video, I'll be talking about storing, handling, and displaying or using your family heirlooms and collections, by which I mean important and historical papers, scrapbooks and albums, photographs, textiles, artwork, and even a little bit on digital materials. We'll then go through the types of things you might have by category with specific tips on each for proper storage, handling, and use. I'll end with a review, which includes a list of places where you can find supplies and additional information on storing and handling various materials. Part one of this video was all about the archival supplies you might want to use, so be sure to watch that video for more information on what archival supplies are and where to find them. For part two, we're going to dive right in. So I'm going to talk about storage and handling each broad category of the types of materials you might have at home. And we're going to start with an easy one, that's books. A standard size book in decent condition does best when it's shelved upright, just like you see in the library. Do make sure that books are kept upright like you see on the picture at the right to prevent slumping and warping, and also use bookends to keep them well supported. Shelve books with the spine out and avoid resting books on the foredge like you see on the left. This puts a lot of pressure on the hinges and spine of the book, which results in some broken book spines, detached text blocks, and also some warping. For oversized books that won't fit on a shelf vertically, go ahead and lay them flat on the shelf, ensuring that they are fully supported, and also keep those stacks to just 2 or 3 books only. Short stacks keep from getting unwieldy and from putting too much pressure on the books on the bottom. And then for books in poor or fragile condition or that has loose pages, placing them in a custom box is a really good plan. This keeps the volumes well supported, well protected, and keeps all of the pieces that might be falling apart all together. And there's a good example of a custom box on the next slide. The clamshell box on the left is perfectly sized for the book that it's holding. And one thing to note about placing books in boxes, the boxes are not intended to force a damaged or warped book back into square. A custom sized box is based off the book's measurements in millimeters in each dimension, and then using the largest measurement of each dimension to ensure that the box is not too small and not trying to force the book in any direction. These custom boxes can be quite affordable in their basic form, a phase box or a basic clamshell box made from plain archival paperboard. From a manufacturer like CMI Microclimates, each box will cost around $10 last I checked, compared to similar pre-sized boxes from an archival supplier that might run you about $15 or more. And they're also not custom fitted, so you get a pretty good deal if you're getting a custom sized box. The CMI Microclimates website is listed in the resources if you're interested in going that route. When you're handling your more fragile or valuable books, be careful not to force them open further than they can take. Using a handmade book cradle like you see on the right, or rolling up some clean cotton towels to support the covers from below aids you in viewing the book without allowing it or forcing it to fall open to 180 degrees. I think it's probably rare to display a book at home, although I could be wrong, more than the typical spine out shelving that we see on our bookcases. However, if you do have a special volume that you'd like to display, maybe a family Bible or something like that, look into getting a higher end custom box, more like the one you see here on the slide on the left. Presentation boxes like this can be very beautiful as well as protective. And if you're interested in going this route, contact a conservator about making one for you. Moving on to paper, we have a little more intervention that we need to do to help papers and documents along. The image on the left here looks pretty cool to me, but I'm seeing a lot of folded paper in the bundle, and the string that's tying it all together is definitely going to make some indentions there and probably tear at the edges. We also can't tell what these papers are without taking the whole bundle apart and looking at the papers more closely. So instead of doing it that way, I'd like to open up those papers, if possible, and group them together in folders to organize them. And I say open them up if possible because folds create points of weakness and sometimes permanent bends and creases in paper. Open and unroll papers as far as you can without forcing them, and that's to avoid breakage and any cracking that might occur. Over time, tight folds and rolls will relax and allow you to work with the items that are folded and rolled more easily. Once you see that your documents are, what your documents are, and what's the content that might be on them, place them in an appropriately sized folder that you've labeled to identify the contents. Nothing too detailed here, just the basics. Use the score lines along the bottom of your folder to accommodate the depth of the stack of papers that it's going to hold, and be sure that you're not putting too many papers in each folder. Using the score lines, you should be able to fit up to maybe an inch tall stack of papers in each folder, so that's quite a bit. If you do have more papers than that in a single unit, maybe say the contents of an old binder that you're putting in folders instead, or a long manuscript of some type, break it into parts and label those folders as part 1 of 3, 2 of 3, and so on. Then organize the folders into a box that is appropriately sized and of course not over or under filled. If you find yourself with extra space in a box, you can get paperboard spacers and that will fill the space and then keep all of your folders upright, which is quite important to avoid slumping and warping. And here are a couple of other options for enclosing and storing papers that are more display ready. We've talked a little bit about placing documents in clear poly sleeves in part 1, and those protect and support those documents quite well, as well as make them easier to handle and view and use them. You can also place larger pieces in a flat box that is, of course, appropriately sized so the items are neither shifting around in that box or getting crushed at the edges. I particularly like this option for items with friable surfaces like charcoal drawings or pastels. While these types of artworks are waiting for a good frame, maybe to be put on display, or if they need to be stored for the long term, a protective flat box with nothing touching the surface of that item is a really great solution. Okay, so moving up to a slightly higher level of intervention, let's talk about photographs. And I say a little more intervention because photos are best stored when sleeved individually so that you can see them. By sleeving your photos in a multi-pocketed album pages like you're seeing here on the right, 1 slide per pocket, and then placing those album leaves or sheets or sleeves in folders and albums, you can achieve really high density space-saving storage that is also really protecting your photos. The idea is to remove photos from the acidic envelopes used by the developer, the ones that they use to deliver your prints to you. You might also see glassine envelopes. They were fairly common for quite a while. And then you can organize them and protect them from the environment and overhandling by putting them in better enclosures. Oh, and you have my permission to pull and discard any photos that you think is a bad take, as in they're blurry or it's a mistake at the end of the reel, or they have a lot of images of the same thing. It's just become too redundant. So feel free to go ahead and remove them with no guilt. And then what if you have a large photo or one that's mounted on a firm backing? I think placing them in a flat box like we saw in the last slide is a really good option for that type of material. This time each photo in a paper folder or a polyester sleeve can really protect them, and then you can stack several instead of leaving the surfaces untouched like you would with a friable surface. Some of you might have glass plate negatives or lantern slides too, and these can be a little trickier because they're fragile, maybe sharp at the edges, and heavy all at once. There are 4 flap paper enclosures that are made specifically for glass plates that you can get. With those, you'd wrap each one individually and then store them vertically in small boxes that are made for this purpose. The small size of the box keeps them from getting too heavy once they're filled up, and the ones that are designed specifically for glass plates also include some interior supports that keep the plates from jostling into one another. And for all of these solutions, be sure to use archival products that have passed the photographic activity test. I mentioned that a little bit more in part 1, so be sure to check that out. And of course, both paper and plastic enclosures will work well. And here are a couple of other ideas and product series that could be helpful for photographs. Again, we see the individual polyester sleeve that allow for safe handling and easy viewing. These are great options for a few select photos that you want to view often, but remember those sleeves add bulk and weight to your storage if you're using them for every single photograph. From large archival suppliers, you can get these multifunctional kits as well. This one has on the right side is from Hollinger Metal Edge and has photo-safe envelopes to keep negatives right next to the photographic prints created from them, as well as perfectly sized boxes to store them in and some archival pens for labeling the envelopes. This system stacks photos together, which might be a more viable option for very large collections of snapshots, as you can get even higher density storage out of that. And I haven't talked about displaying photographs or documents yet, but my recommendation for photographs and for documents is the same. Have high quality reproductions made by a professional digital imaging company. Display the copies in frames of your choosing, and then store away your originals protected from the light and the environment. And then if anything happens to your display copy, such as fading or damage of any kind, you can have another one made from the original or possibly from a digital file created during the first time around, and then just go ahead and replace it. Another benefit is that digital imaging companies may be able to provide a digital restoration service to your copies. By that I mean enhancing color, maybe correcting scratches on the surface, even creases and so on, without altering the original, because they're doing that to the digital copy only. And then textiles is our next category. They're best stored in clean, well-ventilated areas that you can check often for signs of pest or mold activity. Textiles, especially antique ones, are surprisingly fragile, so take care to fully support any textile when you're handling it. For example, avoid picking up a garment by the sleeve or hem, or a flat piece like a tapestry by just one edge. Instead, you want to slide a piece of cardboard or something more sturdy like that under the item to transport it without tugging at one section that could tear away. For storage, you want to roll flat textiles onto a tube for support and protection. And then to break down what you're seeing here on the slide, archival paper is wrapped around the tube to create an archival barrier between the textile and the tube. Then the roll continues with the textile itself, which is then wrapped around with the archival paper plastic. So it's kind of like a jelly roll, if you will. The roll can then be secured with cotton twill tape rather than adhesive tape. The goal is not to create an airtight seal either, because a bit of air circulation is good for most of our, or all of our collection materials, really. You can also place textiles in archival garment boxes using a good amount of unbuffered archival tissue paper to support folds and to avoid creasing. Remember that unbuffered tissue might be a better choice for textiles with animal fibers like wool, silk, and leather, as they don't really like the alkaline environments of buffered tissue paper. And I talked more about that in part 1 as well. On the left of this slide is a good example of creating a form to stuff a textile for safe supported storage. The support forms are made from Tyvek here and then poly stuffing, and it's custom fitted to the moccasins that they're supporting. Tyvek is a very tough, inert material that's affordable, so it can be a great choice for some applications in an archival center setting. For displaying textiles, making a digital copy and then printing that out doesn't really give us a nice looking result as it does for photos and documents that I mentioned earlier. Instead, work with a textile conservator. A conservator can advise on displaying three-dimensional textiles and create display boxes or forms that support the textile, and they look really nice as well. And then to find a conservator, you can use the American Institute for Conservation's Find a Professional tool, and I've included a link to that in the list of resources at the end. Most types of media do best when they're stored upright like books. So that includes audio and video cassettes, CDs and DVDs, cylinders and records. The exception here are film reels, which are best stored flat in film canisters. This is because of the way each format is designed in order to maintain the tape or film pack. If you have a box of media like you see here on the left, tape and film is likely to get jostled around, become unraveled, and develop uneven tape pack around their hubs. You want to watch out for poor quality containers as well, and closures, and then replace them as necessary. However, I wouldn't make that particular part a top priority for items like video and audio cassettes. There really is already the cartridge that holds the tape reels and playback mechanisms, so the tape itself is not coming in direct contact with the outer packaging anyway. I'd reserve replacing the outer packaging for instances when the original is dirty or damaged and it needs replacing. It's important to keep media protected from dust in the environment, so placing media items in format-specific boxes and enclosures does a lot of good. In the photo on the right, you see archival boxes made specifically for video cassettes and audio cassettes, so you can get some good custom fit from archival suppliers for various media. When you're handling media, it's very important to avoid touching the information carrying parts. For records and wax cylinders, that's the grooves. For tapes and film, it's the tape itself or the image side of the film. Unfortunately, for wire recordings, if you happen to have any of those, it's the springy tangled wire that's practically jumping off the spool itself, and that's quite difficult to avoid handling. So for each of those, instead, you want to handle grooved media by the edges, as demonstrated in the groovy photo here. Grasping cassettes by the cartridge is good, and holding film reels by the hub and edges will work for those. For wire, if you do happen to have any, which is a little rare, you want to just keep it stored in its case and then handle it by the hub if absolutely necessary. You want to avoid using any adhesive tape or rubber bands to hold the wire on the spool, and that rule applies to film and tape reels as well. Now, playback is where you can get into some trouble. If you do happen to have the playback equipment on hand, which is also rare, you need to understand that playing your media causes a bit of wear and damage every single time. Magnetic media, which includes audio and video cassettes and open reel audio and video, are also degrading on their own, and playing them back can damage the tape by stretching it or tangling or breaking it. To continue to enjoy the content in your media collections for the long term, I recommend getting original media digitized. For commercial recordings, the content is already likely to be digitized, so you don't need to spend your personal time and money to do that work. There can also be some copyright issues attached to commercial recordings, depending on how you plan to use your digital copies that are results of that digitization. So it's best to stick to your own original and one-of-a-kind recordings. And if you need to store fine art and objects, I think getting in touch with a conservator is a good idea, especially if the items you're going to store are made of less common materials. Some examples might be scrimshaw or maybe some modern mixed materials that can be pretty specialized. They're likely to have some special needs that require unique solutions. For framed items that you've decided not to display, first take a look at the frame itself. Is it unique and valuable to you in and of itself, or is it historical? Or maybe is it modern but made of archival materials? If you answer yes to any of those questions, you might want to save the frame. If it's historical, check with the conservation framer to see if it should be updated with archival backing materials and new glass or glazing. And if the frame is special and the materials are of good quality, go ahead and store or display your artwork in it, no problem. To store framed items safely, you want to keep them vertical in a dedicated storage bin like you're seeing on the right here. You want to avoid keeping them in an area that's trafficked frequently so that the frames aren't bumping into each other. You want to arrange them roughly by size so that none is resting into the center of another. The damaged painting you're seeing at the left was actually, this happened to be an intentional damage, but it could also happen if another item is resting against it and then that item was pushed into it and just poke a hole right through the canvas. I think the frames on the right are maybe a little bit too tightly packed. It's not too bad, but they are easy to see and they're arranged so that they will not pierce into one another. And by and large, they're in an area that's undisturbed, so that's even less likely to happen. And then getting back to the frames, what if your frame is nothing special, not made of archival quality materials? In those cases, I'd just go ahead and remove the artwork from its frame and store it away in archival conditions and enclosures until it's time to display it again. in which case I would take it to a conservation framer. They're also called preparators, to make a custom preservation quality frame or display case with archival materials and UV filtering glass or acrylic. On this slide, we see an example of a proper hinging technique for the mat inside of a frame. That's at the left there. This technique keeps any damaging adhesives away from the artwork. And the example at the right is a before and after of a conservation reframing job done for this particular drawing. And I think it came out quite beautiful. And finally, I'll wrap up this section with a brief discussion on storing, handling, and rendering your digital collections. Whether we're fully conscious of it or not, we're each likely to have vast collections of digital files stored on a variety of devices, including photographs, documents, audio files, and so on. This can be fairly overwhelming to think about as our personal collections that we want to preserve and pass on to the next generation. However, just like paper documents, a good way to store them is to organize them into labeled folders, which are in turn organized into maybe larger folders instead of paper boxes, and then kept together on a storage device like a portable hard drive. However, with the digital materials, having this one device with all of your digital files is like putting all of your eggs in one basket, so to speak. So to avoid this, you want to try following the 3-2-1 rule, which is to have 3 copies of your files on at least 2 different types of storage media, like a hard drive in the cloud, and keep one of those storage media in a geographically separate location. Now, if the cloud is one of your storage options, you have already taken care of that geographically distant location. So you're kind of getting more bang for your buck. I should also mention that these principles apply mainly to digital files that are no longer in active use. They're not being edited or updated, and they're ready to be archived. And when it comes to handling and rendering these archived digital records, we need to be careful not to alter them or give them an opportunity to become corrupted or obsolete. So without going off on a very long tangent about digital preservation and collections management, once a file is no longer active, we want to convert it to a final version in a format that's considered a long-term preservation format. For example, converting a Word document to a PDF makes it uneditable and locks it into its final version. The preservation format for digital images is the TIFF file. That's TIFF if you haven't seen that before. And you want to be making 3 copies, save one to your computer, one to an external hard drive, and one to the cloud. When you're doing all of this hard work, you want to copy and move files in batches. Do not open them or save them individually if you don't absolutely need to. Every time you open a file, you introduce the possibility of corruption, modification, or compression. You want to save any of those actions until you have a few copies of each one so that you can easily replace a corrupted or damaged file when you see it. Great, so now we've gone through some broad categories of the types of materials you're likely to have in your own collections and some general tips on storing, handling, and even rendering them. However, we're not always dealing with precisely one type of material at a time, and so there are a few exceptions, which we'll go through now. Oversized items are particularly difficult to handle and move. If you pick up a large, fragile item from one point, damage is very likely to occur, whether it's a tear or a crease or some breakage. A way to deal with this is by slipping a large piece of cardboard underneath the item and then using that as a tray to move it from one place to another, just like with the textiles I mentioned a few slides ago. If the cardboard support is of archival quality, you might want to keep it in place under an item as a permanent support and transport tray, as long as you have some sort of folder, box, or drawer to cover the item to protect it from dust and light. For oversized flat items, consider making or purchasing a heavyweight, large archival folder in which to place that item. An addition or alternative would be a large flat box to place the folder or the item on its own. This is a great solution if you have a flat surface to store the folder or box. If you don't have enough surface space for storing large items flat, which many of us will not at home, rolling them is a secondary option. You would follow this the textile example from earlier as well for some safe rolled storage ideas and how to do that. Fragile items are also difficult to handle and move, this time risking the loss of fragments of the items themselves. For single sheet papers that are especially delicate, I recommend polyester sleeves, in particular L sleeves or fold and lock sleeves. L sleeves are heat sealed on adjacent sides, forming the namesake L, and are open on the opposite sides. A fold and lock is folded down the center to make a book fold with the flange at one open end that folds over the other open end to, quote, lock the sleeve closed. So what's so great about L sleeves and fold and locks is that they open up completely for you to place an item without having to worry about damaging or crinkling the edges of the item, like stuffing an envelope, so to speak. They also work through static cling, so no adhesive is necessary to seal the sleeve. The less adhesive, the better for our collections. And you want to try to avoid having any sort of adhesives or tapes come in contact with your original materials. And then by definition, scrapbooks and albums often contain a wide variety of materials like photos, paper cards, and newspaper clippings, also ribbons and pressed flowers, locks of hair. They are frequently overstuffed and have items falling out of them. So to protect scrapbooks and albums, place each one in its own box to provide protection and keep everything together, preferably custom sized if that's an option for you. If you notice acid migration, that's discoloration and image transfer from adjacent pages, place a piece of archival quality paper or tissue between those pages. You do want to be careful not to overdo it though, as adding too much bulk could put too much pressure on the binding and could result in a split binding. So I talked about frame items a little bit earlier, and I'd like to explain why frames can be so problematic. Though it seems like a frame protects items from the environment, most frames are not made with preservation in mind. The backing materials and mat may be acidic, causing discoloration, and the glass allows full spectrum light to pass through. On the left, you are seeing a print that was in a bad frame for quite a while. It appears that the mat was particularly acidic and the print is very dark where the mat used to be. The image itself is much lighter, which could be due to less acidity or it could be due to light exposure through standard glass. On the right is the same print after being treated by a conservator. For the most part, we want to remove materials from their frames, especially if they're not on display and that are being stored that way in their frames. Of course, for artwork, the whole point is to display the original. So in that case, have your piece framed by a conservation framer who will use archival quality materials and UV filtering glazing. All right, as with part one of this video, I'll end with a recap and list of resources. This time I have a conceptual overview of preservation at home, and I'll provide you with a list of resources for storage supplies and additional resources that I mentioned in both parts of this series. In a future video series, we'll talk about another major aspect of caring for your collections at home, considering the environment and its effect on materials. Good general guidelines include a cool room temperature or colder for most materials. However, avoid freezing media or just home collections in general. It's just too impractical. You want to aim for a mid-level humidity and try to limit fluctuations in temperature and humidity. And finally, reduce light and pollution exposure as much as possible. Our focus in this series is on storage and handling. So this means protecting materials from mechanical damage and overhandling by placing them in properly fitted archival enclosures. And beyond the storage enclosures and spaces themselves, it's important to keep materials organized so it's easier to spot any problems, maybe like a water leak behind a shelving unit or something like that. And you want to keep the areas around the materials clean to deter pest activity. And then the next step would be to prioritize special items for higher level care, which might include high quality protective and storage enclosures made by a conservator, or maybe just individual enclosures that you are working on your own with archival supplies. That might also include something like insurance, maybe even security measures for high value art and other pieces, and then also conservation treatment. And here on the left are those great suppliers of archival quality products. These companies are all available nationwide online. And I also want to point out that CMI Microclimates is listed here. That's the company that will make affordable custom-sized boxes for fragile volumes and oversized scrapbooks. There are a couple other companies out there as well that I'm less familiar with. I believe Talas, that's T-A-L-A-S, makes them as well. And then on the right, we have AIC's Find a Professional tool, which will help you find conservators and other related professionals like conservation framers that I mentioned earlier in this video. And then we talked about surface cleaning in the last video in part 1 of this series. But here's a great place to find a lot of free information about preservation, handling, and storage, and so on. That's from NEDCC. And that brings us to the end of our storage and handling series for 2022 Preservation Week. In the first video, I talked about preservation practices for the home practitioner, as well as an overview of archival supplies. And with that, I want to thank you for watching.